come and fight! No, East! Stay still! Will you stay still, you idiots? I don't know how many times I gotta tell you not to move! You moved! You moved!
Thank you.
Hello everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Survival, the fourth and final story of the 26th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Sylvester McCoy in his final regular appearance as the 7th Doctor. Survival is the 159th story overall, it's 3 parts long, and it's written by Rona Munro, and of course, as we all know, Survival was the last story to end the 1963 to 1989 run of Doctor Who. So, the plot of Survival is as follows. The Doctor takes Ace back to her hometown of Perivale, only to find that something is very, very wrong. Many of Ace's old friends and neighbours have disappeared, whilst domestic pets become victims of unseen killers. Will the hunter become the hunted when only the fittest survive? So that is the plot of Survival. Survival. What a way to go out. It's a phenomenal story, and I truly think that this is another Sylvester McCoy classic. Even though this wasn't intended to be the last Doctor Who story ever, and Survival wasn't meant to have closed the season, I think regardless of those aspects, it would have definitely been a classic. And the production, I have to really say it is really good, because it's another location filmed story, and Survival is filmed and mostly set in Perivale, and it's great to see a lot of real world elements, not just any real world element. It's great to see elements of the working class suburban areas of London finally getting some representation, from the rundown social club to the corner shops. And I like to think that Survival is a prototype of the 2005 revival, as it does feature a lot of elements that are very commonplace in the revival, but specifically in the Russell T Davies run of the show, or his first run. And especially the elements of having companions come from working class backgrounds and having working class characters being mainly focused on. And of course, Survival was also set on the unnamed Cheetah Planet, which was filmed in the typical BBC quarry. And this would be the last time that we'll see a quarry being used in Doctor Who to represent the planet. And I actually liked the quarry, and I liked the feel that the quarry gave off. I liked the atmosphere that it gave off, with the whole, the tension of, we need to survive, and it gave off that feel. I liked that, and Sylvester McCoy said himself that the quarry was a 5-star quarry. The music score really helped capture the serious feel that Survival had, and it helped a lot with the serious moments, such as the Doctor and the Master's final showdown in the Cheetah Planet, and the final scene of the Doctor and Ace, and the special effects were really good as well. I like the Cheetah Planet's backdrop. They've looked very doom and gloom, and it definitely felt more doom and gloom in the final scene with the Doctor and the Master fighting, and it was starting to resemble hell. Oh, and I really like the costume as well, especially from the cheetah people. They looked like furries in a way. Not saying anything before someone misconstrues this, but yeah, it looks quite realistic in some form. But I could tell that Survival was filmed during a hot time of the year, because it was quite sunny, and obviously you can tell it was quite dry in the quarry. And I read somewhere that it got too hot for one of the actors, and it was in the cheetah outfit, and they pretty much had to remove the outfit and walked out of set in their underwear because it was way too hot. I really like the glowing eyes of someone that had the cheetah spirit in them. I mean, obviously the eyes were glowing. I had it was sort of like a cat or a demon of some sort. And as you can see with Ace here, because she gets infected with the stories, and the Doctor as well, actually, you can see the glow for both of them, and because they were I'll explain about why they were affected later. But I really liked that effect, and it really did help with the story as well. And I really liked the animatronic cat or kitling they used for this story. It looked quite creepy, but I think it was obviously done in a way to give off that feel. The script is superb, and I really like the Cotmore Master Plan influence on this story as well. And because that guy then actually did help with the script, the Doctor's character in terms of his development, Ace's character and her development, and how Survival pretty much wraps that up. And and of course the direction by Alan Waring was brilliant as well. And of course the plot was fantastic as well. Even though Survival was not meant to have been the last Doctor Who story, but it had a lot of elements that would have made for great TV finales. One of the elements being main storylines being wrapped up in a very satisfactory way, but at the same time, if there was a bit of continuation there, if it had been picked up or would have returned for something, there would have been at least something there to at least base on if it did ever return. Unlike the Doctor and Ace's storyline, even though it was wrapped up very nicely, especially their own respective storylines, but if Doctor Who had returned in 1990, I'm pretty sure that it would have had a new chapter for their respective storylines as well. So Survival is a nice ending to a chapter for their storylines. Well, of course, Ace returns to Perivale back in her own time and is seemingly a changed person thanks to the Doctor aiding her, although it was in a very rough way. With the demons she had been struggling with all slayed, Ace was able to return home with a fresh perspective, but in usual Doctor Who fashion, things aren't what they seem. And of course, the main message of Survival is survival and survival of the fittest. And the theme of survival has been a recurring theme for this season and a bit of the previous season as well. And of course, survival actually addresses the message of survival of the fittest head on. Like, what does one have to do to survive? Adapt, fight, and of course, be wise about it, because the weakest always get eliminated first, and that's the law of the jungle and the process of elimination. And this is mentioned several times in the story and is done brilliantly, and is pretty much told in tandem with the kill or be killed mindset that Sergeant Patterson had, which he was trying to relay to the youth club he was teaching, and this is what Midge was able to adapt from, and that's how he became a cheetah person. And obviously these contrasted with the Doctor's pacifist ways, which gets pushed to the very extremes thanks to the Master's influence and the cheetah planet itself, which seemed quite sentient in a way and was slowly influencing people's emotions and enhanced their desires to fight and kill. But of course the cheetah planet was dying as well, so because of this is how he was trying to pretty much get a lot of people under their influence, because this is obviously the Master's own doing as well. And of course, a lot of people were susceptible to the influence of the planet, and the Doctor had actually said that if you engage in any way of combating with the cheetah people or any others, you pretty much become a cheetah person and become a part of the planet. In addition, as I said before, Survival is a story for both the Doctor and Ace in terms of their respective peaks for their character developments. Though this is more to do with Ace, as the last few stories focused on her dealing with her issues, and of course she comes home with a renewed sense of understanding and maturity, even if she was only there for a quick visit just to see her friends, but she does come across a new, attractive dilemma in how she has to handle it herself. That coming in the form of Kara, but the Doctor though, it seemed like he's a lot less manipulative for now, and is using his pacifist ways to survive the story. But even though his pacifist ways are pushed to the very limit, thanks to the Master, and the duel that they had towards the end of the story was very much resemblant of how destructive both the Doctor and the Master are in terms of their disdain for one another, and of course it does hint to the Doctor's darker side, which is what the Andrew Cartmel master plan was about. It was exploring a darker side of the Doctor, but then the Doctor realizes at the end that fighting was not the way to go about it, and that's how he was able to return to Earth, and how the Master was left on the dying cheetah planet. And of course, Survivor had a lot of fantastic moments, but of course I want to talk about the ending of Survivor, with the Doctor and Ace walking back to the TARDIS after everything is all done, with Ace choosing to continue traveling with her beloved Professor, and of course the closing monologue by the Doctor, which was actually added in because Doctor Who eventually got cancelled. It made the scene very special because, aside from the subject matter of survival, I really like what survival actually represents for Doctor Who, aside from, as I said before, the subject matter of kill or be killed and the whole survival element, and obviously not getting to any excessive violence. It signals the end. It signals the end of an era, but it also is an indicator for a brand new a brand new era, which will probably have to wait for quite some time for it to eventually kick off. But eventually, the wait was worth it at the end, and the closing scene captures the whole essence of survival, especially the how it's pretty much the beginning of the end and the start of something brand new. Although we have to wait for a bit, that's how it brilliantly captures that. Of course, other great moments in the story included the opening of this story where that guy got snatched up and was taken to the Cheetah Planet, and shortly afterwards, the TARDIS lands nearby. The Doctor in the corner shop seeing the Kitling, Ace ending up in the Cheetah Planet after being pursued by Kara, the Doctor and Patterson meeting, ending up there as well, and meeting the Master at the end of part 1, which we see that Master is very much under the influence, or some strange influence, of the Cheetah Planet. Everyone escaping from the Master and the Cheetah people, with the Doctor trying to distract them by juggling and actually tripping up one of them. Ace properly meeting Kara for the first time after she threw a rock against Kara's head, which wounded her for a bit. And of course, the part 2 cliffhanger where Ace is very much under the influence of the Cheetah Planet, and the Doctor is very concerned about that. The Doctor images drew at the start of the final act, which had Ace believe that the Doctor had died, even though because of the collision that the two had knocked the Doctor out somewhere onto a nearby abandoned couch. And of course, Kara showing up to try and stop the Master, but she ended up getting killed. And of course, Kara turning into human form and dying in front of Ace. And of course, the scene before the final scene with the Doctor and Master having their own duel on the Cheetah Planet, which is now surrounded by violent flames thanks to them being influenced by the planet, the planet was obviously starting to collapse on itself, and that's how the Doctor realizes that fighting is not the way, and as he puts it himself, if you fight like animals, we die like animals, and that's how the Doctor ends up back on Earth. And when he returns to Perivale near the TARDIS, he meets this woman who was complaining about something, and oddly enough, some people think that woman was Jackie Tyler, but that doesn't really make any sense whatsoever, but I'll explain that later. So on to the acting, which I thought was really good, and I think Sylvester McCoy was brilliant. And the Doctor's not manipulative, and there's no aspects of the Doctor's mysterious past or future that hasn't even happened to the Doctor show up. And in lieu of that, the Doctor does go back to his old roots in a way, because the Doctor is very much a pacifist, and of course his pacifist nature is put to the test against the Master, which also gives us a hint to the Doctor's darker side as not just wholly a manipulative Doctor, but which is quite evident in the broad that the two have at the end of the story, because it's quite clear that the Doctor and the Master are literally two sides of the same coin. But of course the Doctor does have good morals and wants to be good, although at times it can be questionable at best, because he does do some stuff that would consider someone to be quite frightened of the Doctor, as we saw in the Curse of Fenric. And of course we have the Master, who's very evil and likes to express that evil, and obviously the Doctor dislikes the Master because he's evil, and vice versa. And also the Master wants the Doctor to become evil, but not too evil. But I think the Master just simply wants the Doctor dead because he dislikes the Doctor, and because the Master obviously realizes that the Doctor is very powerful, and if the Doctor was to become evil, he wants the Doctor to be stopped. As it was explained in the Trial of a Time Lord, the Valiant being an evil version of the Doctor, because he was quite frightening for the universe, and the Master didn't want the Doctor's evil to eclipse his evil, so to speak. But then the Doctor does realize that fighting is not the way, and obviously is taken back to Earth whilst the Master, who really wanted to kill the Doctor, is left behind on the Cheetah planet. And of course, during that brawl, the Doctor and the Master were very obviously under the influence of the Cheetah planet. Although the Master was already influenced by it, but then the Doctor quickly succumbed to that influence because of his disdain for the Master, and that pretty much excels that feud a bit. And obviously, with the Cheetah planet literally about to die, is very much a metaphor of how destructive the Doctor and the Master's feud was. But before all this, the Doctor does take a step back in the story, so Ace can take center stage in this story, and their relationship with each other is explored once again. And I think this is more to do with the Doctor's influence on Ace, because it is very obvious that the Doctor is clearly rubbed off on Ace, as we saw in The Curse of Fenric, and we see it here as well. And of course, Survivor was quite serious, but there was a lot of comedic moments. Well, not a lot, but there are quite a fair bit of comedic moments that Sylvester McCoy does really well, and which does help the story seem humorous at times. Especially the scene when the Doctor was trying to juggle to distract the Cheetah people, and later tripping one of them and tipping his hat. And of course, was the scene where he and Patterson got caught in Ace's trap that was meant to catch a Cheetah person, but then Ace obviously frees and realizing that they caught the Doctor. And of course the scene where after the Doctor and Midge's duel on the motorbike, and after their collision, which sees the Doctor landing somewhere like a nearby couch, and we see the Doctor with his ass hanging in the air. It was very much like a cartoon, but it was a nice little humorous scene to break up the tension a bit. Right, and another aspect is that Sylvester McCoy is really hammy here, and of course the best example of this was his duel with the Master, when he pretty much says, "If we fight like animals, we die like animals!" And of course that was a really intense scene, but then Sylvester McCoy literally he chews the fuck out of the scene, and it was quite impressive as well. And of course the scene where he was trying to get Ace and the others to try and stay still, not engage in fighting, was another hammy scene. But there was an outtake which was quite funny as well, when he was like, "Will you?" And then this scene, So of course this is an outtake, and obviously with an error, because Sylvester McCoy was like, "Will you fucking stay still? I told you how many times not to move, to move!" And he literally proceeds to throw a temper tantrum, just flinging his brolly and removing his coat, and he just flew it on the floor. And if I do, I might attach the video to the description, or put it somewhere in the video so you can see how brilliant that was. It was just thinking about it just really makes me, just pretty much strengthens why I love Sylvester McCoy's Doctor. He is one of my favorite Doctors ever, and I'll explain why in a bit. So back onto the Doctor. Despite his past manipulation and the mystery and knowing about Ace, this story does strengthen the proof that the Doctor does indeed care for Ace and doesn't want to get her too into harm's way, even though he had to resort to extreme measures that is questionably morally questionable at best. But it's not the case that he wants to make sure that Ace doesn't do something she would regret, and is more than happy to take her back into the TARDIS so they can travel the universe fighting evil together. And the closing monologue definitely shows that, because the last lines were, "Come on Ace, we have work to do." And McCoy obviously performed that beautifully. But with that being said, I do feel as if that from this story, and if we definitely would have seen this in season 27, the Doctor and Ace's relationship is starting to change a bit, but a bit for the worse, because I do feel as if Ace she still does resent the Doctor for what he did to her and how he knew about her all this time. And I think that would definitely have been explored a lot more in season 27. But Ace, I think Ace obviously maturing would have actually come to terms and realized it herself, and this would have been a very bitter end for the Doctor and Ace's relationship, which was kind of hinted at and Power of the Doctor, and when she when Ace saw the doctor's her doctor's hologram. And then obviously they had a nice little conversation with each other, and I think that pretty much confirms my beliefs about the Doctor and Ace. Sophie Aldred was brilliant here also, and of course, continuing with the Ace stories, with Ghostlight addressing Ace's past trauma and with why she burnt down Gabriel Chase when she was a child, and we learned why she did it, because she sensed the evil that was in that house because of Light's hesitance to change, which was, and what he was doing was quite evil. And of course, the Curse of Fenric addressed her present trauma and the hate she has for her mother, and how she unknowingly saved her mother as a baby, and and later finding out how she was a mere pawn used by both Fenric and the Doctor. And of course, survival addresses a very possible future trauma slash struggle of her pretty much relapse, which pretty much dealt with Ace possibly relapsing to her old self, so to speak. But I do like how Ace is heavily focused on the story, and she does ask the Doctor to take her back to Perivale so she can see some of her old friends. And I do like how she is matured enough to realize that something is indeed gone wrong when she's asking some people. Like, she meets one of her friends who's pretty much telling her that everyone has disappeared, and of course Ace is starting to become very curious about this, and she tries to get the Doctor to understand what is going on, but the Doctor is too busy trying to attract the kitten, because maybe he does know what's going on as well. And I think that scene with the Doctor, with Ace trying to get the Doctor's attention, was very, can be contrasted with their first scene in Remembrance of the Daleks, with the Doctor obviously trying to get Ace to open her mind to her new surroundings, because I assume this was probably her first adventure on aboard the TARDIS. But Ace was too focused on herself, such as wanting to eat, and was more focused on her music boombox. So I did like how that scene pretty much was contrasted with one another. But then I also do like how Ace is pretty influenced by the Doctor, and the Doctor's influence is stronger than the influence of the Cheetah Planet, because Ace does make some deductions herself to figure out what is actually going wrong, and that influence does hold strong for Ace, especially when the Doctor is able to convince Ace to use her powers, to use her cheetah abilities for good, to take everyone back home in part 3. And of course, towards the end, when she thinks that the Doctor had died during his battle with Midge, she read his hat and grabbed his umbrella, as if it was a way as if it was done in a way to remember him. But obviously, the Doctor was all right at the end. But Ace still does have some teenage tendencies coming through, especially complaining to the Doctor that they landed on Perivale on a Sunday, which is the boring day of the week, which I do agree with. I can't stand Sundays. But of course, Ace is once again put to the test because of her struggles, which shaped Ace's roughened personality, and it could all easily come back thanks to the influence of the Cheetah Planets, because when she was properly introduced to wounded Kara, because Ace was actually responsible for wounding Kara when she threw a piece of rock against her head, which, of course, if you act violent in any way, shape, or form, that's how you slowly fall under the influence of the Cheetah Planet. And of course, Ace is very susceptible to this, and because of that, it pretty much strengthens her relationship, or her budding friendship, with Kara. But the way they were bonding seemed as if it was a blossoming romance of some sorts, but this might have stemmed from Kara's fascination with the shiny insignia that Soren gave to Ace in the previous story. This is what I was talking about in the Curse of Fenric review, that insignia would become quite important in this story, especially in terms of Ace and Kara's developing friendship, relationship, or whatever. And then, of course, because of their blossoming friendship with one another, Kara does entice Ace with an opportunity to live with to live on the cheetah planet with her and be free with everyone, which Ace does find very enticing, and because of like the concept of being free, running wild with the hair, with the wind, like running with the wind and whatnot. But then obviously, Ace is very much alright because, as I said before, the Doctor's influence over Ace does seem stronger than the influence of the Cheetah Planet, thanks to the Doctor convincing her not to fight any further and use the influence that she gained from the planet for her good, like taking everyone back home. But ultimately, at the end, once the Master is trapped on the planet and Midge is dead and Kara's dead and everyone's back home, it is quite bittersweet for Ace, and she does lament over what has happened, especially with and she wonders how what would have been like if she had actually properly fallen under the influence, and how she was talking about how the influence was really strong, and how she said that she felt like she could wander the wind, and how she felt completely carefree whatsoever. But the Doctor does tell her that the hunt will live on in her forever. When an Ace does tell the Doctor that her home is the TARDIS and continues to travel with the Doctor. And that is how I think Survivor neatly wraps up Ace's own storyline. Of course, Survivor was merely about Ace's anxieties, worrying about how she had forgotten about everything that the Doctor had taught her, and how she would have easily fallen back into her old ways, and because it's not just with Kara alone, she could have gone anywhere else and faced the influence as well. So it does show how scared Ace would be, how she would fall back into her old destructive ways. And of course, thanks to Kara, it could have all easily faded away. And if Kara wasn't there, it could have happened elsewhere. And I think this is what Ace was pretty much afraid about. But she decides to travel with the Doctor because she knows that with his influence, it could all pretty much go away. But then obviously, the Doctor himself is quite manipulative, so Ace probably still had those anxieties about the Doctor as well. But then with Kara, the two had bonded with each other to the point where Kara definitely sensed a lot of herself in Ace, and how she could have easily been a cheetah person. And then of course with their relationship, Ace and Kara were quite protective of each other, and how if anything happened to any of them, one of them would have literally fought to the death for their fallen friend. And of course, Kara does show up in part 3 to try and fight the Master on Ace's behalf, but then Kara ended up getting killed by the Master. But then Ace doesn't actually go and attack the Master head on, because she's still grieving over the Doctor. But if it happened the other way around, Ace definitely would have actually gone to attack the Master herself if the Doctor hadn't been harmed in any way, shape, or form. But then I think Ace not transforming into a cheetah person fully after seeing Kara's fallen body, this does show that the Doctor's influence is stronger than the cheetah planet's influence. And now she pretty much allows the cheetah people to take Kara back to their own planet to try and bury her. But I think the novelization says that Ace had actually given her a Viking funeral, but with motorbikes. So it's definitely clear that in this story, Ace was able to overcome her new troubles, but obviously they would still come back in other ways, shapes, or forms. And then how she was able to handle this with a new character, though not with a sense of a personality transplant, but in the sense of maturity and the spirit of adventure and desire to be free living within her. And if we had gotten the 27th season, Ace would probably have liberated herself from the Doctor so she can be free on her own. And her character development would have helped her realize that the Doctor probably would have had any control over his manipulation, and probably would have decided to cut ties with him so she can get away from him. But of course, Ace does start up her own charity after leaving the Doctor, called the Charitable Earth, and as we see her in The Power of the Doctor, Ace is very much free. She's still a badass, and she has pretty much channeled all of what was giving her grief, and has clearly gotten over it to try and help unit and help the Doctor and help others in any way, shape or form to stop the Master. But when I get to Power of the Doctor, I'll talk more on that later. Sidecast, they're all pretty good. Small, but they're all really good. First off, we have Sergeant Patterson, an army officer who was teaching teenagers survival techniques. He knew of Ace and disliked her because of the trouble she previously caused and how she disappeared without telling her mother Audrey. He was watching the Doctor when the neighbors were complaining about him, and the two ended up on the Cheetah Planet. He was very brutish and quite stubborn, and he was pretty much wanting to take out the cheetahs head on, but then the Doctor was warning him not to, but then he still wanted to fight. Right? But then when Ace was able to take everyone back home to Perivale, he just walks off without saying thanks towards the Doctor and Ace. But he was later killed by his students thanks to Midge, who was under the Master's control. Well, because obviously because Midge wanted to cause trouble to aid the Master. And we have Shrila. She was a friend of Ace's who ended up on the Cheetah Planet also. She didn't really do much, but her and Derek were being pursued by the cheetahs. But she was relieved to see Ace when she ended up on the planet. And then, of course, she was taken back home with Ace and the Doctor. And we have Midge. He was definitely a major side character in the story, and he was another one of Ace's friends. And he was coerced by Patterson to attack the cheetahs, which saw him fall under the influence of the Cheetah Planet, and he became more of a cheetah person when he killed one of them and decided to take one of their necklaces, the tooth necklace or something like that. And he helped the Master return to Earth. He was told to duel the Doctor, but then the collision injured Midge, and he was instructed by the Master to kill himself. He was a very interesting character because he was the one that pretty much went with the survival of the fittest motto, and how he pretty much lived by that analogy whilst on the planet and ended up killing a cheetah person, and he was the last human to die in the classics. Then of course we have Derek. He was transported to the Cheetah Planet and met Midge and Shrila. After returning home to Perivale, he thanked the Doctor and Ace for bringing him home. Even though he survived in the TV version of the story, he's actually killed by Midge after coming back home in the novelization of Survival. Then we have Kara. She was the cheetah person that was responsible for bringing Ace to the Cheetah Planet, but she was wounded by Ace after having a piece of rock thrown at her, but the two started to bond thanks to Ace slowly falling under the planet's influence, which saw Kara respect Ace in a lot more. When this is what caused Kara to offer Ace a place to live on the Cheetah Planet with everyone else. After Ace went home, Kara returned to Perivale in an attempt to save Ace and tries to go after the Master, but she ended up getting killed. And as she passed away, she reverted back to her human form and was taken back to the Cheetah Planets by a cheetah person. I think Kara was a brilliant character, and I liked how she was a representation of Ace's new troubles, of her possibly falling back to her old destructive self, because without the Doctor's influence, it would have been very inevitable that she would have fallen back to her old ways, although in cheetah form. But obviously, as I said before, this was Ace's old ways was her expressing her trauma and her grief. And obviously, Ukara was definitely represented at how attractive the situation of Ace falling back to her old ways. But of course, the Doctor's influence and Ace's maturity was stronger than the Cheetah Planet itself. And of course, Kara is played by Lisa Bowerman, who would go on to provide the voice of Bernie Summerfield, and she was a companion of the 7th and 8th Doctors and the Virgin New Adventures novels where she was introduced, but she was later brought on to Big Finish. And finally, we have Squeak. She was Midge's kid sister, and in part 3, though this was off screen, she actually saw the Master with Midge and they killed her cat, and it was implied that they scared the mother away, or they probably would have killed her. And she was telling the Doctor and Ace what had happened. Despite this being a small role, she was actually a very good character, and she's played by a very young Adele Silver, who would go on to play Kelly Windsor and Emmerdale a few years after Survival, and Silver was actually featured in the Making of Survival special featured on the DVD. And I liked how she recalled Sophie Audrey being very nice to her and her mother, and that was a very sweet moment that she was talking about. And I did actually like how she was actually in the television studio, or somewhere near the television studio, but then you can actually see it in the back how she was talking about her experiences on the show. And I think there was a rumor saying that she was quite difficult on set because she was a kid, but that was not the case at all. Of course, you have the Master, who you haven't seen since the end of Trial of a Time Lord, as the enemy of this story, and this is the last time he's the enemy of the story in the classic series, which is quite fitting as well because he's the enemy of the last Classic Who story. He ended up on the Cheetah Planet somehow and is clearly under the influence of the Cheetah Planet, and he's definitely like slowly succumbing to the effects because he does have the fang, like he has the little fangs and the eyes, and he seems to have some form of control over the cheetahs. And I did like how his reveal wasn't shrouded in any mystery whatsoever. He didn't have any disguise, or he was operating somewhere, or wasn't hypnotized. Well, he did actually hypnotize Midge later on, but he wasn't in any way, shape, or form like how he was in, let's say, the Fifth Doctor's era. Yeah. But the Master wanted to get back to Earth, so he used the Kitling, which acted as a link between the Earth and the Cheetah Planet, so the Cheetah person can go and abduct someone. He was able to attract the Doctor, and he wanted the Doctor to help him escape from the planet, and I assume that the Master has lost his TARDIS, which is why he couldn't actually escape. So after overhearing from the Doctor that the only way to escape the planet was to use someone who was under the influence of the cheetahs, he was able to use Midge, and he was slowly starting to become a cheetah person himself. Not just any cheetah person, he was definitely starting to become more feral, so to speak. And then the Master wants to kill the Doctor in the end, once and for all. And in the end, they brawl in the Cheetah Planet, which was on the verge of destruction, and when the Doctor realizes that killing the Master wouldn't help the case at all, and tries to get the Master to escape with him, the Master still wants to kill the Doctor, but then when the Doctor finally comes to that revelation, just as soon as the Master was about to deal with the killing blow, the Doctor is teleported back to Earth, whilst the Master is left for dead in the soon-to-be-destroyed planet, but he obviously escapes. And Anthony Ainley was brilliant here, and in the near decade he's been playing the Master, I would have to say that Survival is his best performance as the Tremas Master. And I say this because he's allowed to play the Master in how he wanted to be played, a style very reminiscent of Roger Delgado. A cold, scheming, calculating, and just as manipulative individual without having to go all ham and panto, which is how Ainley's Master has been portrayed since season 22, which really ruined his character. And I do like how Survivor pretty much turns the Master back to his old self, which Ainley handled brilliantly, and it does go to show how he is able to handle a lot of the Master's darker side, more sadistic, more psychotic side, which he was able to show in previous stories like in Logopolis and Planet of Fire, but then those were hindered by some very silly elements, and elements that just ruined the Master whatsoever, because in Logopolis, he had a very strong, a very scary introduction, because in the story before Logopolis, he took over with the body of Nissa's father, Tremas, and killing Tremas altogether, and he returns to Earth, kills Tegan's auntie and a nearby policeman, and creates an entropy wave that was going to wipe out the entire universe, and ultimately causes the Fourth Doctor to regenerate. And in the Planet of the Fire, he pretends to be a god so he can try and steal, I think, the gas for himself to try and turn him back into science, because he accidentally shrank himself to the TCE. But then that's what caused the Master to be ruined in that story, because he later on he escapes from his little shoebox and almost gets whacked by Perry with her shoe, and of course Logopolis. A lot of that darker element of the Master was ruined by the Master's evil laugh just with just laughing everywhere at random points in the story. But I do like how dark the Master was compared to the Seventh Doctor, and I do think that he does have better chemistry with McCoy compared to other Doctors, because the contrast that they have with each other is very much evident, because the Doctor, as you all know, is capable of manipulative feats, but only uses them for his own morals and to try and save the day, but the Master just manipulates them for... Also, he also manipulates for his own purpose, but then his own purpose to destroy the universe or even destroy the Doctor, so to speak. But as I said before, the Master does pretty much envy the Doctor, because if the Doctor was to become evil and abandon those morals, he would become quite dangerous, and the Master pretty much envied that because he wanted to be the one to destroy the universe, not the Doctor. So, yeah. Do you think that Anthony Ainley's Master is good with the Cottonmore Master Plan, and it helps advance the Doctor's character of the Master Plan itself? So, obviously, with that being there, and of course, with the Master being there, it does help the Doctor's character, the Seventh Doctor's character, fall even more under the evil influence, and well, not necessarily the evil influence, or the darker influence of the Doctor, so to speak. So, in terms of fault, the only bit of criticism I do have is that the story's ending was quite abrupt, but Doctor Who was cancelled abruptly by the BBC, so funny enough, it makes sense. Now, the final part of this review. Whew. This is getting a bit emotional now, a little bit, but yeah. So, seeing that Survival is a story of loss, as Survival was the last story to air in the classic run, the last story to air in the 1980s, the last regular appearance of the Seventh Doctor and Ace, the last television appearance of Anthony Ainley's Master, but he does appear in a Doctor Who video game called Destiny of the Doctors in 1997. This was the last story to be produced by John Nathan Turner after a near decade in the showrunner's chair, and of course the last story to be script edited by Andrew Cartmel, because he actually stepped down. If the show had returned for season 27, he wouldn't have returned as the script editor, as because of John Nathan Turner's advice, and he actually did give his blessing for his outline to be used for season 27. So I will give my last words for these people, but for Andrew Cartmel and John Nathan Turner, I will cover them in their own separate videos. So first off, I will speak on a few last words about the Seventh Doctor. He obviously doesn't regenerate in this story, and he was most likely would have regenerated in the end of season 27, so it's farewell to him for now. We do see the Seventh Doctor again and for the first few minutes of the TV movie, where he eventually regenerates because he gets gunned down by gangsters in San Francisco and regenerates whilst in surgery. And I think John Nathan, well, not in surgery, but yeah, I think it was in surgery, right? And I think John Nathan Turner made the perfect casting for Sylvester McCoy. Even though season 24 was very shaky, but Sylvester McCoy was able to deliver, made his Doctor his own character, and he was able to show that he could handle a lot of the darker, more dramatic elements, as well as the comedic elements, because Sylvester McCoy does have a comedic background. But he not just delivers it, he delivered the hell out of it. And I honestly love Sylvester McCoy's Doctor, and he is one of my favorite Doctors ever, because he is very complex, and he's very more like the modern day Doctors. Is because he is explored a fair bit, because he does have a little bit of darkness within the Doctor that does make him more interesting compared to other Doctors, not just classic Doctors, even Doctors in the new series as well. Because that darkness is something you really want to look at, and it really makes you want to explore why the Doctor is like this, and Sylvester McCoy's acting really helps with the curiosity, because hidden behind the goofiness and how joyful the Seventh Doctor is, there's that extra layer of how manipulative, how calculating he is, and how dark the Doctor can go, and how Sylvester McCoy just nails he nails that element. It's really, really good. And of course, with the Doctor's mysterious past being brought up and the Doctor's true identity also being brought up, hinting the Doctor to be more than just an ordinary Time Lord, definitely did help the Seventh Doctor as well. And obviously, the Doctor's identity is never actually revealed in this story, though we did come close to having it revealed in Silver Nemesis, but that never happened because John Nathan Turner doesn't want any religious context tied to Doctor Who. But in Long Barrow, which was the last of the Virgin New Adventures novels, reveals or at least hints that the Doctor was the third member of the original founding members of the Time Lord Society of Gallifrey, with the other two members being Omega and Rassilon. And I honestly must give it to Andrew Cartmel for basically working overtime to try and come up with how to make the Doctor mysterious, and his master plan really helped Doctor Who in the McCoy era run and helped it pretty much revive. How it pretty much helped it revive from how divisive the last few years of Doctor Who was before McCoy came on board. Plus, what also why I also like Sylvester McCoy is his relationship with Sophie Aldred and how their relationship really helped the Doctor and Ace's characters and how their chemistry together really helped some of the plot for some of the stories, because the plot of some stories such as The Curse of Fenric really helped the plot, because the plot focused on their characters and their relationship with one another, with the Doctor pretty much having to break Ace's faith by pretty much insulting her, and you can really tell that Ace was really hurt by this, and if the chemistry wasn't there, the scene wouldn't have been as effective. Yeah, but as I said, but then yeah, it does really make that, because the chemistry together really helps that scene stand out. And of course, we have Sophie Aldred. She was phenomenal as Ace, and I loved how Ace was able to prove that she was a lot different compared to her predecessors, and she was a lot more hands-on compared to other companions, and she pretty much took on Daleks and Cybermen head-on. She literally, like one of her famous scenes, is she literally whacks a Dalek with a baseball bat, and how she, though it's not really spoken as much as the Dalek scene, she actually destroys some Daleks with some gold of a slingshot, and she actually does manage to weaken the Cyber Leader, which doesn't really get spoken about for some odd reason. But of course, and I would think calling Ace a badass wouldn't really do much of anything. I don't think that's not really enough, and I honestly do think that Ace is one of my favorite companions because she's more than a badass. I can't even fucking find the words to describe Ace, because I think calling her a badass won't really just cut it. But I think Ace is definitely a prototype for the modern day companion, a young girl coming from a working class background in London and has a storyline that explores the character across the time and the TARDIS, and then how she was important to the Doctor, like how Rose was important to the 10th Doctor and how Donna was also important to the 7th Doctor as well. But I do like how Ace was analysed and how as to why she's so rough as a character, because of her tough upbringing with her dislike of her mother and the trauma she had faced, and of course it was definitely amplified with how she was used by both Fenric and the Doctor, who she grew to love the Doctor. And obviously when that scene where it was revealed that the Doctor had known about Ace all this time and was pretty much insulting her, it pretty much was describing how much Ace meant to the Doctor and vice versa. And the Doctor obviously does assure her, saying that he never meant any of what he said, but he needed to do this in order to save her from Fenric. And of course, we don't know how Ace departs, and it was a mystery for many years, although it was covered by several accounts. It's most especially in the Virgin New Adventures, and I think she does have an argument with the Doctor, leaves for a bit, comes back, and it becomes like a space woman or something. I don't really know, it's very complicated. But when she does return in The Power of the Doctor, which aired 33 years after Survival, it was revealed that Ace left because her and the Doctor had simply fallen out. And I would have assumed that Ace had enough of the Doctor's manipulations and simply wanted out, which, as I said before, does strengthen my theory of the Doctor and Ace's relationship deteriorating after the curse of Fenric. But it was mentioned in the Sarah Jane Adventures that aired before The Power of the Doctor that she set up a children's, not necessarily a children's charity, but a charity called A Charitable Earth, which helped people around the world. And I do think it is canon, but however, if Ace did depart in season 27, if Doctor had gotten one, her original departure would have seen Ace become a Time Lord, well, enrolling into the Time Lord Academy so she could become a Time Lord. So I do think that this is another one of the Doctor's machinations, or the Time Lords themselves, but sorry about to get a bit flustered explaining this, but yeah, Ace is an amazing character and should really set the standard for the Revival Companions, which is why I really admire Ace so much, because if it wasn't for Ace, we probably would have had a lot of more damsel in distress companions in the Revival, which wouldn't have worked whatsoever. And lastly, we have Anthony Ainley's character Master. He played the Master for the whole of the 80s, and I do think he played the Master to the best of his abilities, even though the writing wasn't that fantastic. Plus, I felt that the Master wasn't as threatening as he was in other stories. He's in Logopolis, which featured his Master in full because he pretty much was able to nearly destroy an entire universe with his entropy wave, but compared to the Mark of the Rani, where he literally gets kicked in the balls, well, he gets kneed in the balls by the Rani. But yeah, Survivor does prove that he is pretty much capable of being a good enough successor to Delgado, but because of how his character was derailed during the 80s, I will have to say that Ainley's Master is my least favorite Master, even though he was a fantastic actor, but I just feel as if the writing he received didn't really do him any favors, because he was either hiding behind disguises or he was a victim of just bad writing, bad campo writing, and just very bad camp. It didn't really help the Master at all. It made the Master feel more pantomime compared to any other Master. So, to conclude this review, Survival is a story that signs off the end of an era that was the classic Who in its entirety, but unknowingly signals the start of a brand new era and shapes how we view Doctor Who today, with modern thinking doctors, companions and characters from relatable backgrounds. Doctor Who placing itself in a working class environment that proves that Doctor Who can pretty much hit home, considering the fact it is a sci-fi TV show and the fact that it proves that it can hit home with very familiar elements that we all have been accustomed to. Does show that Doctor Who can adapt to any way, shape or form, whether it's from the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. It can hit home in many ways, more than one. So Survival gets another perfect 10 out of 10. Yes! I had to do that. And finally, that is Classic Who all wrapped up. I honestly can't believe I'm here. I've been doing these reviews for almost 4 years, and I can't believe that I'm here. I actually reviewed the entire Doctor Who. I honestly can't believe it. I did it! I honestly can't believe it. Like, I remember doing these reviews, like, especially when I first started university. I was doing them in my old uni room. If you remember, like, some of my old reviews, like my first Doctor reviews, so you just see me in my uni room with my Doctor Who DVDs at the back, and obviously doing it on my old laptop, which was a pain to film with, and of course I upgraded my laptop, which is one I'm using right now currently during the first lockdowns, and of course that gap was noticeable with my reviews in the Celestial Toymaker and the Gunfighter, which was when I made the changeover when I last couple of reviews for season 3 was me trying to accustom myself to this laptop, and I didn't know you can actually, which is one of the reasons why I had to go off camera, because I didn't actually know that there was we could actually film videos and reviews with this laptop as well. And so that was quite fun. But I honestly admire my strength. Like, I admire how I was able to do the entire 26 years of Doctor Who. Even though there were some setbacks over the years with uni and just life in general, but I did it, and I'm honestly quite proud of myself that I've actually done it. Like, I don't want to get emotional. I'm not that emotional person, but just getting here is like, I remember telling my friend Enzo, who also has a YouTube channel. I'll put a link to his channel in the description. He is the Blue Box reviews. I was actually telling him that I can't believe that I've actually done the entire Classic Who. Like, I just can't believe it. And there were times I thought I was definitely going to give up and just call it a day, but especially with these gaps. But then I wanted to at least prove to myself that I not give up and just press on with these reviews, and I did it. And I just want to thank every single one of you that have watched my videos, those who have subscribed to my channels, and those that have commented as well. It really means so much to me. I really appreciate that. So here's to another couple of years, and here's to more reviews to this channel, and even here's to possibly even getting more subscribers. So, but obviously this is not, even though this is the last Classic Who review, but this is not the end of my Doctor Who reviews or videos, because I'll be ranking all 4 stories of season 26 next, and then after that I will be diving into the wilderness years. So I'll obviously be covering aspects like Dimensions in Time, the 30th anniversary special that was done with Children in Need and it was crossed over with EastEnders, and of course I will do the TV movie. And of course, I will start the Doctor Who revival in the new year. So, thanks for watching this review. Please leave a comment about what you thought of Survival and this review. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Until then, see you later.